Let me ask you something kind of uncomfortable. Have you ever told yourself you were going to start fresh on Monday? New diet, new budget, new routine, maybe even a new version of yourself. And then Monday comes and you don't. Not because you forgot, not because something came up, but because somewhere between the intention and the action, something in your brain just didn't cooperate. And here's the part nobody talks about. It wasn't weakness, it wasn't laziness, it wasn't some moral failure on your part. It was dopamine. And dopamine doesn't care about your goals. It cares about one thing, making you feel good right now. Not tomorrow, not in 5 years, right now. And here's where it gets really interesting and a little bit maddening. The habits that feel the worst for your future are almost always the ones that feel the best in the moment. Scrolling instead of sleeping, spending instead of saving, eating instead of building, avoiding instead of acting. All of it runs on the same biological software, and until you understand how that software works, you are fighting a war with your hands tied behind your back. So in this video, we're going to break it all down. The psychology of why poor habits feel good, how that psychology is quietly draining your wealth and your potential, and most importantly, what the people who actually break the cycle do differently. Because the goal isn't to shame you for enjoying things. The goal is to show you the code running underneath your choices so you can finally rewrite it. With all things said, DJ, hit the intro. All right, let's start at the beginning. What actually is dopamine? Most people think dopamine is the pleasure chemical, like your brain releases it when something feels good, and that's why you want more of it. And that's close, but it's not quite right, and the distinction matters a lot. Dopamine isn't actually about pleasure, it's about anticipation. It's the chemical your brain releases when it expects a reward, not when it receives one. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz ran a famous experiment in the 1990s. He gave monkeys a reward, a drop of juice, every time a light flashed. At first, dopamine spiked when the juice arrived, but over time, something shifted. The dopamine spike moved. It stopped firing when the juice arrived. It started firing the moment the light flashed, the anticipation of the reward. The brain had learned the pattern, and the pattern itself became the source of the dopamine hit. This is everything. Because it means your brain isn't chasing the reward, it's chasing the feeling of being about to get the reward. That's why you get a dopamine hit just from picking up your phone, before you've even opened an app. The brain has learned phone equals possible reward, notification, validation, something interesting, and the anticipation alone triggers the release. That's why online shopping feels exciting before you've bought anything. That's why opening a food delivery app feels good even when you're not sure what you want yet. The wanting is the high, not the getting. And once you understand that, a lot of things start to make sense. Now here's where this connects directly to your habits and your money. Every habit you have runs on what researchers call a habit loop. It has 3 parts: a cue, a routine, and a reward. The cue triggers the behavior, the routine is the behavior itself, and the reward is what the brain gets out of it, which most of the time is a dopamine hit. And here's the critical thing. The brain doesn't evaluate whether the reward is good for you long term. It only evaluates whether it felt good right now. So if you reach for your phone when you're bored and scrolling feels good, even for a few seconds, your brain files that away. Boredom equals phone. Loop locked in. If you stress spend when you're anxious and buying something gives you a 10-second hit of dopamine from the anticipation of the purchase, your brain files that away too. Stress equals spending. Loop locked in. If you skip the gym because the couch feels better right now and avoiding discomfort triggers a small relief response, your brain will make it slightly easier to skip again next time. This is why habits compound. Not just the good ones, the bad ones compound too. Every repetition of a habit deepens the neural groove. The path gets more worn. The behavior gets more automatic. And after enough repetitions, the habit doesn't even feel like a choice anymore. It just feels like what you do. Now let me give you some numbers here, because this isn't just theory. A study from Duke University found that more than 40% of our daily actions aren't conscious decisions. They're habits, running automatically in the background. More than 40%. That means nearly half of what you do today wasn't really chosen. It was just the loop running. And when you apply that to financial behavior, the impulse purchases, the subscription creep, the emotional eating that drains the grocery budget, the nights out you agreed to even though you said you were saving, it starts to add up to something serious. The American Psychological Association found that stress is one of the most common triggers for impulsive financial decisions. When cortisol, the stress hormone, spikes, the brain actively shifts away from long-term thinking and toward immediate relief. In other words, when you're stressed, your brain literally becomes worse at making future-focused financial decisions. Not metaphorically worse, neurologically worse. And what does modern life give most people in abundance? Stress, notifications, overstimulation, decision fatigue, all day, every day. Which means most people are making a significant chunk of their financial decisions in exactly the mental state that makes good financial decisions hardest to make. Think about how powerful that is. The system that profits from your spending has also engineered an environment of constant low-grade stress that biologically pushes you towards spending. Whew. That's not paranoia. That's just the math of modern consumer psychology. Now here's the piece that most people miss, and it's the piece that explains why the cycle gets harder to break the longer you're in it. Dopamine tolerance. Every time you get a dopamine hit from a behavior, your brain does something counterintuitive. It slightly reduces its sensitivity to that stimulus. It's a protection mechanism. The brain doesn't want to be overwhelmed, so it dials down the receptor response, which means the same behavior that gave you a big hit last month now gives you a smaller one. And so you need more stimulation, more spending, more scrolling, more food to get back to the same feeling. This is the same mechanism behind addiction. And while most people aren't addicted to spending or social media in the clinical sense, the neurological process is on the same spectrum. Dr. Anna Lemke, a psychiatrist at Stanford and author of Dopamine Nation, describes it like a seesaw. On one side is pleasure, on the other side is pain. Every time you tip the seesaw toward pleasure, the brain self-corrects by tipping it back toward pain to maintain balance. That tipping back is the craving, the withdrawal, the restlessness when you put the phone down, the low-grade anxiety when you haven't spent anything in a while, and the natural response, the one your brain screams for, is to tip the seesaw again. More dopamine, more relief, more of the thing that started the cycle. This is why people who are trying to spend less often go on a big splurge after a few good weeks. Why people who are trying to eat better cave harder after a period of restriction. The seesaw effect. The brain was trying to correct, and the pressure built until it released. Let's talk about what this actually costs you. Because we've been in the psychology for a while, and I want to bring it back to the real world numbers. The average American spends approximately $1,500 per year on impulse purchases alone. Not planned spending, not bills, not groceries. Pure impulse. That's according to a Slick Deal survey. And $1,500 a year might not sound catastrophic, but remember, this is money that was never budgeted, never intended. It just happened, automatically, from the loop running. Now layer on top of that the emotional spending, the stress purchases, the treat yourself moments that come after a hard week, the subscription you signed up for during a moment of optimism and forgot to cancel. Research from West Virginia University found that emotional spending, spending driven by mood rather than need, accounts for a significant portion of consumer debt in the United States. And consumer debt in the US is sitting at over $17 trillion. $17 trillion. A huge portion of that number isn't people buying houses or starting businesses, it's the accumulation of thousands of small, dopamine-chasing decisions made in moments of stress, boredom, or emotional hunger. The credit card swipe that felt like relief, the online cart checkout that felt like a reward, the restaurant meal that felt like comfort. All of it real, all of it understandable, all of it running on the same biological code, and all of it quietly, consistently compounding against you. Here's a connection that most personal finance content completely misses. They talk about budgets, they talk about investing, they talk about compound interest and index funds and retirement accounts, and all of that is real and important, but none of it works if your dopamine system is running unchecked in the background. Because a budget doesn't stop a dopamine craving. A spreadsheet doesn't rewire a habit loop. Knowing that you should save doesn't override a brain that is biologically wired to seek immediate reward over delayed gratification. The Stanford marshmallow experiment, you've probably heard of it. Kids who could wait for 2 marshmallows instead of eating one immediately showed better life outcomes across the board. Better finances, better health, better relationships. But what the original study often gets wrong in the retelling is this. The ability to delay gratification wasn't just about willpower, it was heavily correlated with environment. Kids who grew up in reliable environments, where they had reason to trust that the second marshmallow would actually arrive, could wait much more easily. In other words, your ability to delay gratification is partly biological, partly habitual, and very heavily shaped by the environment you're operating in. Which is exactly why trying to fix financial habits with willpower alone almost never works long term. You're not fighting laziness, you're fighting a deeply conditioned neurological response shaped by your history, your stress levels, and your environment. The people who figure this out, the ones who actually change, don't rely on willpower. They change the environment, they change the cues, they redesign the loop. All right, so here's the part where we get practical, because I know you didn't come here for a neuroscience lecture. You came here because somewhere in the last few minutes, something clicked, and you want to know what to actually do about it. So let's talk about the 4 things that people who genuinely break the dopamine habit cycle do differently. Firstly, they audit their cues, not their willpower. Most people try to break habits by relying on motivation or discipline, but motivation fades, discipline runs out, cues don't. Remember the habit loop: cue, routine, reward. The cue is the trigger, and if the cue is always there, the loop will always fire. So instead of trying to resist the behavior, you remove or replace the cue. If you impulse spend online when you're bored in the evenings, delete the shopping apps from your phone. Not temporarily, delete them. Make the cue harder to access. If you stress eat after work because the kitchen is the first room you walk through, change the route. Sit somewhere else first. Put the snacks out of direct sight. Change the physical cue. If you scroll social media first thing in the morning, put your phone in another room the night before. Remove the cue from the environment entirely. This sounds almost insultingly simple, but the research is overwhelming. Environment design beats willpower every single time over the long run. BJ Fogg at Stanford has spent decades proving it. The goal isn't to become a stronger person. The goal is to build a smarter environment. Secondly, they give the brain a replacement reward, not just a restriction. Here's why cold turkey almost never works for habits. When you remove a behavior that was producing dopamine, the brain experiences something like withdrawal, a deficit, a restlessness, an itch that needs scratching. If you just remove the behavior without replacing the reward, the brain will eventually find its way back to the original behavior, or find something equally unhelpful to fill the gap. The smarter play is habit substitution. Keep the cue, keep the reward, change the routine. Stressed after work and want to spend? The cue is stress. The reward your brain wants is relief and a dopamine hit. Instead of online shopping, try a 15-minute walk, a cold shower, a quick workout. These aren't just healthy choices. They are documented dopamine-producing activities that can genuinely satisfy the brain's reward hunger. Bored in the evening and reaching for the phone? The cue is boredom. The reward is stimulation. Instead, pick up a skill-building activity that produces small wins, a language app, a trading simulation, even a puzzle. Anything that generates a sense of progress, which is one of the most powerful dopamine triggers that actually works in your favor. The goal is to hijack the loop, not destroy it. The loop is a feature of the brain. Redirect it. Don't try to eliminate it. Thirdly, they make the future feel real. Here's a core truth about how the brain weighs decisions. The further away a reward is in time, the less real it feels to the brain. Economists call this temporal discounting. $1 today feels worth more than $1 in 5 years, even if rationally the invested dollar in 5 years is worth much more. The brain was designed for immediate survival, not long-term wealth building. So future rewards, retirement, financial freedom, long-term health, feel abstract, vague, like something that happens to a future version of you that doesn't quite feel real. The people who break this pattern do something powerful. They make the future concrete. They don't just say, I want to retire early. They calculate exactly how much that requires. They put a number on it. They set up an account they can see filling. They make the abstract tangible. They don't just say, I want to be healthier. They track a metric, daily steps, weight, a fitness benchmark, so the future payoff becomes a visible, measurable thing happening right now. Because the brain responds to visible progress the same way it responds to a reward. Progress is dopamine, and if you can make your long-term goal produce small, visible wins in the present, you've turned delayed gratification into an immediate feedback loop. That's the secret. The goal isn't to suffer now for a reward later. The goal is to redesign how the reward feels so it's available now. Lastly, they do a dopamine fast. And no, that doesn't mean sitting in a dark room doing nothing. A dopamine fast, done right, isn't about eliminating all pleasure. It's about temporarily reducing the high stimulation inputs that have desensitized your brain's reward system. Dr. Cameron Seppa, who popularized the concept, describes it as resetting your baseline, giving your dopamine receptors time to recover sensitivity so that smaller, healthier rewards start to feel meaningful again. Practically, this looks like no social media for 48 hours, no impulse shopping, no binge watching, no junk food. Not forever, just long enough for the brain to recalibrate. And what people consistently report after even a short fast is that things that used to feel boring start to feel interesting again. A walk outside, a real conversation, cooking a meal, reading a book. These aren't small things. If your brain can find genuine reward in low stimulation, high return activities, exercise, learning, building something, then you have dramatically shifted your relationship with your own habits. And the financial implications of that shift are enormous, because a brain that can find satisfaction in progress rather than consumption is a brain that naturally saves more, spends less impulsively, and builds wealth almost as a side effect of just living better. Look, I want to be honest with you about something. None of this is quick. None of it is a hack. The dopamine system took years to wire itself the way it is. It's not going to rewire in a week. But here's what is true, and this is the thing I want you to hold on to. Every single time you choose the behavior that serves your future over the one that serves your next 10 minutes, you are physically changing your brain. The neural pathway for the better habit gets slightly more worn. The one for the old habit gets slightly less traveled. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, and it means your brain is not fixed. It's not permanently wired for poor habits. It is literally capable of rewiring itself with every decision you make. You are not your patterns. You are the person who can change the patterns. And the first step to changing them is understanding them, which, if you made it this far, you now do. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Not which habit to break first, not which budget app to download, but this. What is one cue in your daily environment, one trigger you've never really questioned, that is quietly running a loop that doesn't serve you? Just one. Find it, name it, and then decide what you want to do with it. Because awareness is where the loop breaks, and you just became aware. Thanks guys for staying this long and watching my videos. Be sure to hit that subscribe button for more financial and self-help videos. Stay superior.